I love to sit down and watch Trump's bootlicking sycophants get dismantled on live telly, and we've got an absolute cracker here. But before we dive in, I'd love to give a massive shout out to Dan from Queensland, Australia, Brian Farrelly from Canada, John Pelosi from North Carolina, James from New Zealand, Wendy from the UK, Kenneth Burridge from Aarhus, and Terry from the south of England. It's people like you who make what we do here possible. Right, so, Jennifer Ewing, Republicans overseas. She's about to defend American foreign policy on British television. And, look, I'm not going to spoil it, but let's just say the contradictions are... We've got tensions between the US and UK over Iran's strategy. We've got Keir Starmer catching heat from all sides. And somehow, Trump's own ally ends up making arguments that sound suspiciously like the very position they're meant to be attacking. The irony is just, it's too good. If you love watching me unravel disasters like this, please click that subscribe button. And while you're at it, if you'd like to get a shout out in my next video, then like the video, share it with a friend, and tell me your name and where you're watching from.
Do this over with Jennifer Ewing, who represents Republicans overseas. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi.
Why was the president so personally rude about our prime minister?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think this is happening just because of the prime minister not allowing the US to use Diego Garcia. I think this has been building for a long time. And I think the two countries, despite the special relationship, have some fundamental differences.
Such as?
Energy security. It's one of the big things that Trump ran on and that he's very, serious about. Number two, border security, another thing that Trump ran on, that he's very serious about. And then I guess if you want to dig in a little deeper, there have been a lot of spats around free speech, whether it's the online safety bill. We know that $30 billion trade tech deal was canceled because of the online safety bill. So I think there's just some fundamental differences going on between the two countries.
But why bring that up so publicly when you've got another European leader sat there?
Yeah,
in the full glare of publicity.
Exactly. I was thinking about MERS during that time, and when he was just sitting there and how that must have felt. But the other thing I think we can look at is not just the UK and the US kind of going in different directions. It's also a difference between Eastern and Western Europe and the America First. Trump administration is kind of more aligned with the Central and Eastern European countries who value, their sovereignty more and that sort of thing. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I believe if the president really thought that Keir Starmer was doing this because it's the best thing for the British people, he might respect it a bit more. But I think the other things that the prime minister has done in the past shows that maybe he doesn't have, the British people.
So actually the stuff about Diego Garcia and providing the basis for attacking Iran, that's actually a bit of a red herring. You're saying the problems are actually way deeper than that.
I believe so, yes. I remember being asked by the House of Lords right after the president was elected last year, so say a little over a year, what do you think that the Trump being reelected means for the special relationship? And I said, along with a colleague of mine, Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas UK, that there's going to be some differences. Energy security, which we know President Trump has been telling Europe for years, you've got to be drilling, don't rely so much on Russia. We see what's happened now with the EU maybe now having to go back. So, and then the other thing, obviously, being border security and free speech.
Okay, Oliver, as the Labour representative on the programme, all this effort that Keir Starmer has put into the special relationship clearly hasn't worked, listening to Jennifer.
Well, let me just go back to what Jennifer has said, because Jennifer has said she thinks there is fundamental differences between the two countries. I'm not sure there are fundamental differences between our two countries. If you look at the polling in the States, I think about 51% of people in America think this attack on Iran has been a bad idea, 39% strongly oppose it. There may be differences between the two leaders. I think that is absolutely fair. But when it comes to our two countries, I was in the States last week working with Democrat mayors, Republican mayors, working on deals between our two regions. And that was going great. And those relationships between mayors, between places, between businesses,
so basically just
between
ignore what Donald Trump said yesterday.
Communities. No, absolutely not. I think where Donald Trump and Keir Starmer agree is you've got to put your country first. Donald Trump says America first. Keir Starmer is clearly putting the British interest first.
Callum?
Look, I'm saddened to see this. I mean, this is a very grave moment for the UK's security and for what's going on in the world. And resorting to name-calling and criticism like this is not the way to conduct diplomacy between our 12 allies. It's true, we have a difference of agreement, and that's reasonable. It is quite right that the UK should take its stance. We Liberal Democrats believe that this war is illegal, and we regret very much that the US and Israel have conducted it unilaterally. We've now been sucked into it because of Iran's retaliation, and that's what we as Parliament need to now discuss with the Prime Minister and hold him to account for the actions.
So are the Lib Dems then supporting the defensive military action that the UK is taking now?
We are very concerned that this so-called defensive-offensive separation hasn't been clearly defined by the Prime Minister. He hasn't been able to define what the difference is between the two. And we've been very clear over time.
Well, no, he has, though. It said it's about attacking missile launchers and the capacity for Iran to launch missiles that could target British interests.
But
that's pretty clear.
What we're allowing to happen is for US planes to take off from our bases, the sorties they fly on, the targets they hit are not being seen by UK eyes. And it's all too easy for that to then slide into the UK being complicit in actions that could potentially be illegal. So what we want is the government to come forward clearly and set out the limits of its authorisation, how it's going to monitor that, and give Parliament a clear sense that offensive operations would lead to a vote before we committed the UK to war.
Okay, so right out of the gate, she's asked why the president was so personally rude about Keir Starmer. And her answer is essentially, well, it's not just about Diego Garcia, it's about everything. Energy security, border security, free speech. She's rattling off the entire MAGA manifesto like it's a shopping list. And here's what kills me. Jennifer Ewing has been doing this dance for years now. Republicans overseas has consistently tried to sell Trump's chaos as principled foreign policy, and every single time it falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. She mentions that $30 billion tech deal getting cancelled over the online safety bill, and look, fair enough, that's a real thing that happened. But she's framing it like the UK is the unreasonable party here, when Trump literally threw a tantrum on the world stage with another European leader sitting right there. Friedrich Merz is just sitting there. The German Chancellor watching this unfold in real time. The diplomatic damage of that moment alone, I mean, you can't buy that back with a phone call. But here's where it gets properly delicious. She says Trump would respect Starmer more if he believed Starmer was doing what's best for British people. That's exactly what Starmer's been saying. That's his whole argument. He's taking a lawful, strategic approach rather than just rubber stamping whatever Washington wants. And Jennifer just accidentally validated it while trying to criticise him. The Lib Dem fella makes a decent point about parliamentary oversight, but hold on, we'll get to that.
Okay, Ella, this jibe that it's not Winston Churchill, I mean, you can imagine that hurting a Conservative Prime Minister. Is that much of a big deal for a Labour Prime Minister? They don't harken back to Churchill very often, do they?
I don't think Starmer even has ambitions on being Churchillian, and I don't mean that as a compliment, by the way. I think he probably should in certain contexts, the prospect of international conflict being one of them. You know, you opened this segment by saying, was he working in the British national interest? I don't think that was his first priority. With Keir Starmer, the emphasis is always on legality, which has been raised here. You know, the question of what is legal or not, which is really a means of sort of excusing away your inability to make a decision on a perhaps a moral, political, you know, question. At the background to all of this is, you know, an existential crisis with a country like Iran, threats to the West. I think, you know, it's not a question of the US saying jump and the UK saying, OK, how high? But it's quite clear that the decisions or the indecision that Keir Starmer's displayed wasn't from a sort of solid ideological basis, but on this kind of flimsy, was it legal or not? And, you know, I'm not suggesting that the British public are raring to go for war, but there's a weakness inherent in that sort of fence-sitting, which I think doesn't chime with any of us.
Oliver?
I find it slightly bizarre to say that adhering to international law and looking at international law as the bellwether as to whether you make a decision is the wrong approach. I think it's absolutely right to.
No, but because if I can just be clear, it's because Keir Starmer cares about an international framework.
And then you can come back.
Let me just respond to what you said, because you know it's absolutely right to say I don't think Keir Starmer is trying to be Winston Churchill. I think what he's trying to do is navigate a course through what is an incredibly tricky set of circumstances. I think anybody on either side of this, and I appreciate where the Lib Dems are, I don't think you're in this place at all, but I think, you know, you look at where Reform are, you look at where the Greens are, you look at where the Tories are, saying this is there is an easy solution to this if you just do this one thing. It's just simply not true. It's incredibly difficult. The Prime Minister is navigating what are incredibly difficult circumstances, and I think he's getting it just about right.
There are different interpretations of what international law says here, and he's chosen one interpretation.
Well, the government have chosen one interpretation. I think that is fair to say. And the government will need to prove that they are right. And I agree that it needs to come before Parliament, and there needs to be a conversation in Parliament amongst MPs and amongst the government.
I mean, the point I'd make to what you said, Heather, is that there's no evidence that the US consulted the UK on this attack. So, we talk about what should the UK's approach is, has to be reactive to something that has been done by a country that we have previously thought we had an alliance with. And then you need to look at ends and means. This has been a violent attack on Iran. There's no evidence that airstrikes are the way in which to achieve regime change or to deliver some of the outcomes that Trump's talked about. And his war goals, any war effort should have a clear set of objectives, a course of action, and some measure of success.
Well,
and what we hear from the White House is a divergence across a whole range of different topics.
There's no indication that Trump even wants. I mean, he changes every day whether or not he does want regime change. But that is, I don't think anybody here would mourn the death of the supreme leader, or indeed want some manner of change for Iranians. I think what Keir Starmer has been shown to have done is having to scrabble to come to really, at this point, what is a position which is kind of in line with Trump anyway.
Yeah. Well,
this defensive-offensive thing is unconvincing.
Let's put some of those points to Jennifer from Republicans overseas. And we just saw some pictures of Keir Starmer heading to PMQs, so he's left Downing Street now. Yeah, Jennifer, what is the #1 goal of this military action against Iran that's being conducted by President Trump?
You know what? That's a great question, and even
because we don't know.
Well, yeah, exactly. Ella
we don't know what they're trying to achieve.
No, and actually, I'll say that as a Republican, and there's a big discussion.
Doesn't that worry you? Your country's launched a massive war with no end
Yes,
goal?
it does.
Right.
100%. Yeah, it does. And
maybe they shouldn't have done it then.
Well, time will tell whether we should have done it or not. And I think the answers that need to, the questions rather that need to be answered is how imminent was the nuclear threat from Iran, especially assuming we had, obliterated it in the June 12th war.
How imminent do you think it was?
Well, I don't know.
Right there. Did you catch that? Jennifer Ewing just admitted on air that she doesn't know what the end goal is. A representative of the party whose president launched this military campaign against Iran, and she's sitting there saying, "That's a great question," when asked what they're trying to achieve. And look, I've watched Jennifer do this routine before. She's been defending Trump's foreign policy decisions for years through Republicans overseas, and usually she's got the talking points locked and loaded. But this is different. She's visibly uncomfortable because there is no coherent answer. The presenter asks, "Does that not worry you that your country launched a massive war with no end goal?" And she says, "Yes. 100% it worries her. That's not spin anymore, that's a crack in the foundation." Here's what really gets me though. All this criticism of Starmer being too focused on legality, being too cautious, being too hesitant, and then the Trump ally in the room essentially admits that maybe having a clear objective before you start bombing people isn't such a bad idea after all. The irony is, chef's kiss. She tries to recover with, "Time will tell whether we should have done it," and honestly, that's the most terrifying sentence I've heard all week. Time will tell? We're talking about military strikes on a nuclear threshold state, and the best the administration's defenders can offer is, "We'll see how it goes." Starmer gets called weak for wanting legal clarity. Trump's team doesn't even have strategic clarity. And somehow, he's the adult in the room here.
We're given very different answers, right? I mean, apparently that was obliterated in the 12-day war in June. And then the second thing is, what is the likelihood that we'll have an efficient and effective Western-friendly regime after this is all over? And nobody knows the answers to that question. So even within the Republican Party, there is a major discussion going on around, is this what people voted for, right? I mean, so people support President Trump, but he also ran on no new wars that are not existential to the United States of America. That's why people did not want the United States involved in Ukraine, Russia. It wasn't existential to us.
Yeah.
We have enough problems at home with the economy and border and healthcare. So you're going to keep an eye on, and I'm sure you guys are, on different voices within the Trump-supporting Republican Party about these actions.
And it sounds to me you're a voice that's opposed to it. And therefore, you're opposed to Donald Trump now.
I think that I'm not opposed to Donald Trump, but I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And if he is going to make this more than we just take out Ayatollah Khomeini, which again, I agree with Ella, I don't think anybody's losing tears over that. If if it continues to 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and even longer, people are understandably going to be having flashbacks to, you know, Afghanistan and these 20-year wars, which again, nobody voted for.
So the thing for you will be how long it goes on for. You could live with it if it's for a couple of weeks, but you couldn't live with it if it's for 6 months, 2 years.
And it's not just me, it's the people who voted for him. And then you add on top of that the people who can't stand him and will use every mistake, every, God forbid, American body bag that comes back to America as, you know, working against him in the 2026 midterms and the 2028 election. So politically, I would say it's one of the riskiest things he's done. Now,
Would you wish he hadn't done it?
Well, again, I can't, you know, it's too early to tell. It's highly risky, though. And I think Americans got quite fortunate, lucky, spoiled, maybe, with the fact that in 2021, you know, Trump took out Soleimani and there was no blowback. At the time, a lot of people thought that it would be the, you know, World War III. That didn't happen. And then again, this past June with the 12-day war, a little bit of blowback, but not really. It was all kind of controlled.
Do you think
this is
Trump
different.
got a little bit drunk on those surgical strikes, thinking that he could just replicate them on a bigger scale?
I don't get drunk. That's
I mean, he's
your
teetotal.
word.
He's teetotal.
Well, he's of course he's
it's a
teetotal.
rhetorical
Yeah.
device.
Look, it's politically risky because America, especially those people who voted for him, do not have the tolerance, nor does he have a mandate to enter into another war that most people probably had to Google what an Ayatollah was, right? Now, I hope I'm wrong. You know, I hope that this ends very, very quickly with wonderful results and the rest of the world is safer because of it.
Do you know who I think you might find yourself agreeing with? British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Like, a lot of that sounds like probably what's in his head right now.
You know what? That's why I said if I thought, and I didn't vote for Keir Starmer, you know, I'm not a Labour supporter, and I disagree with the fact that he's doing this in the British public. I think, like some of the panel said, he's doing this because of legal reasons, which is something that America would look at and be like, that's just too bureaucratic, right?
Well, no, legal reasons and what he thinks is in the national interest. It's
do
two things.
Do you believe that Keir Starmer has acted in the, you know, the best interest of the British people since he's been in office?
Why do you think he hasn't?
Because I think most people are not very pleased with the way he has run this country. And that could be people on the left, people in the center, people in the growing right. I mean, look what just happened in, you know, with the Green election taking over a Labour stronghold. So we've got these fractions both on the left and the right, but I don't think anyone thinks, you know, Keir Starmer is a British populist, meaning he does what's in the national interest of British people.
Ella, are you witnessing giant cracks opening up in the...
So I'm going to pause it right there. I will leave a link in the description below so you guys can go and check it out in full if you guys want to. But I'm confused because this is the thing for me as a Brit who lives here.
And there it is, the full circle moment. Jennifer Ewing just spent this entire interview criticising Starmer for being too cautious and too legalistic. And then she lands exactly where he is. She's worried about prolonged conflict. She's worried about mission creep. She's worried about Afghanistan flashbacks and 20-year wars nobody voted for. Hold on, because this is genuinely remarkable. She literally says if this continues for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, even longer, people will have flashbacks to endless wars. That's not Trump's position. That's Starmer's position. The man she just spent the last several minutes dismissing as some bureaucratic pencil pusher who doesn't understand real leadership. And here's the thing that really bakes my noodle. She brings up the 2026 midterms and the 2028 election as political risks. Every American body bag becomes ammunition against Trump. She knows this. The party knows this. So why did they do it without a clear exit strategy? Why did they launch something this massive when their own supporters are already asking, is this what we voted for? She even admits it's one of the riskiest things Trump has done. Those are her words, not mine. And when pressed on whether Trump got drunk on previous surgical strikes, thinking he could replicate them at scale, she doesn't deny it. She deflects with a vodka joke, but she doesn't actually push back on the premise. The presenter asks if she agrees with Starmer, and she basically says yes, but tries to dress it up with, I didn't vote for him. That's not a rebuttal, love. That's confirmation wrapped in partisanship.
Because of it.
Do you know who I think you might find yourself agreeing with? British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Like a lot of that sounds like probably what's in his head right now.
You know what? That's why I said if I thought, and I didn't vote for Keir Starmer, you know, I'm not a Labour supporter, and I disagree with the fact that he's doing this in the British public. I think, like some of the panel said, he's doing this because of legal reasons, which is something that America would look at and be like, that's just too bureaucratic.
So let me just sit with this for a second. Because we've reached the end of this interview, and I genuinely need a moment to process what we've all just witnessed together. The presenter points out that Jennifer might find herself agreeing with Keir Starmer, and she doesn't even fight it. She says, you know what? That's why I said, and then immediately pivots to, I didn't vote for him. As if that changes anything. As if partisan loyalty somehow negates the fact that she just spent 15 minutes arriving at the exact same conclusions as the man her entire movement has been ridiculing. This is what happens when ideology meets reality. When the talking points run out and you're left with actual questions about actual consequences. Jennifer Ewing walked into this studio ready to defend Trump's Iran strikes, and walked out essentially endorsing Starmer's approach, while still insisting she disagrees with him. That's not political commentary. That's cognitive dissonance in real time. And look, I want to be fair here, because Starmer has had a rough go of it lately. The Mandelson situation with Epstein has been genuinely damaging. He's lost his chief of staff over it. He's got people in his own party calling for his head. His approval ratings are in the gutter, and the Greens just took a seat from Labour in a by-election. The man is vulnerable politically, and everybody knows it. But here's what this interview accidentally revealed. Even Trump's most loyal defenders, when you strip away the noise and the partisan cheerleading, end up advocating for exactly the kind of measured, legalistic approach that Starmer represents. They mock him for wanting clarity before committing British forces. They call it bureaucratic. They call it weak leadership. And then they sit there on camera and admit they're terrified of another Afghanistan. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot criticise someone for being cautious while simultaneously admitting that caution is probably warranted. That's not a political position. That's just contradiction dressed up in a nicer outfit. The broader picture here is genuinely alarming, though. We've got Trump launching military action against Iran with no clear exit strategy. We've got his own representatives admitting they don't know what the end goal is. We've got America demanding Britain rubber stamp whatever Washington decides, while simultaneously insulting our Prime Minister on the world stage. And through all of it, the people defending these choices keep accidentally validating the people they're attacking. What does this tell us about where we're headed? It tells us that even the true believers have doubts they can't quite suppress. It tells us that when you scratch beneath the surface of MAGA foreign policy, you find the same anxieties and concerns that supposedly weak leaders like Starmer have been expressing all along. The difference is, Starmer said it before the bombs started falling. I'm not here to tell you Starmer is perfect. He's demonstrably not. But I am here to point out the absolute absurdity of watching Trump's allies spend an entire interview criticising his approach, only to land in exactly the same place by the end. That's not me being partisan. That's just observation. Right then, if you made it this far, you're clearly as invested in watching political hypocrisy get exposed as I am. Subscribe to the channel and let me know your name and where you're watching from, so I can give you a shout out in the next video. And if you'd like to support the work we do, please click the join button below to become a channel member.